The winter of 1855 was an exceptionally severe one, even in the southwest of England, where winters are usually mild. On the morning of 8th of February, Abbot Brailsford, the principal of the village school in Topsham, Devon, walked out of his front door to find that it had snowed in the night, and he was intrigued to notice a line of footprints, or rather hoofprints, that ran down the village street. At first glance they looked like the ordinary hoofprints of a shod horse, but a closer look showed that this was impossible, for the prints ran in a continuous line, one in front of the other. If it was a horse, then it must have had only one leg and hopped along the street, and if the unknown creature had two legs, then it must have placed one carefully in front of the other, as if walking along a tightrope. What was odder still was that the prints, each about 4 inches long, were only about 8 inches apart, and each print was very clear, as if it had been branded into the frozen snow of a hot iron. The villagers of Topsham were soon following the track southward through the snow, and they halted in astonishment when the hoofprints came to a halt at a brick wall. They were more baffled than ever when someone discovered that they continued on the other side of the wall, and that the snow on top of the wall was undisturbed, for the tracks approached a haystack and continued on the other side of it, although the hay essayed no sign of a heavy creature that clambered over it. The prints passed under gooseberry bushes and were even seen on rooftops. It began to look as if some insane practical joker had decided to set the village an insoluble puzzle. But it was soon very clear that this explanation was also out of the question. Excited investigators tracked the prints for mile after mile over the Devon countryside. They seemed to wander erratically through a number of small towns and villages: Lympston, Exmouth, Teignmouth, and even Dawlish, as far as Totnes, about halfway to Plymouth. If it was a practical joker, he would have had to cover over 40 miles, much of it through deep snow. Moreover, such a joker would surely have hurried forwards and covered the greatest distance possible. In fact, the steps often approached front doors, then changed their mind and went away again. At some point, the creature had crossed the estuary into the River Exe. It looked as if the crossing was between Lympston and Powderham. Yet there were also footprints in Exmouth, farther south, as if it had turned back on its stone tracks. There was no logic in its meandering course. In places, it looked as if the horseshoe had a split in it, suggesting a cloven hoof. It was the middle of the Victorian era, and few country people doubted the existence of the devil. Men armed with guns and pitchforks followed the trail. When night came, people locked their doors and kept loaded shotguns at hand. It was another week before the story reached the newspapers. On the 16th of February 1855, the London Times told the story, adding that most gardens in Lympston showed some trace of the strange visitor. The following day, the Plymouth Gazette carried a report, mentioning the theory of a clergyman that the creature could have been a kangaroo, apparently unaware that a kangaroo has claws. A report in the Exeter Flying Post made the slightly more plausible suggestion that it was a bird. But a correspondent in the Illustrated London News dismissed this idea, pointing that no bird leaves a horseshoe footprint. He added that he had passed a 5-month winter in the backwoods of Canada and had never seen a more clearly defined tracks. In the Illustrated London News for the 3rd of March, the great naturalist and anatomist Richard Owen announced dogmatically that the footprints were those of the hind foot of a badger, and suggested that many badgers had come out of hibernation that might seek food in the night. He did not explain why all these badgers hopped along on one hind foot. Another correspondent, a doctor, described how he and another doctor bestowed considerable time in endeavouring to discover the peculiarities of this most single impression. He claimed that on one more minute examination of the tracks, we could distinctly see the impressions of the toes and pad of a foot of an animal. His own candidate was an otter. Another correspondent, who signed himself Ornither, was quite certain that there were the prints of a great bustard, whose outer toes, he claimed, were rounded. Another gentleman from Sudbury said he had recently seen impressions of rats surrounding a potato patch, and that they looked exactly like the drawing of the devil's footprints. He thought that the rats had been leaping through the snow, landing on their full body weight and producing a roughly horseshoe-shaped impression. A Scottish correspondent thought the culprit could be a hare or polecat bounding through the snow. These suggestions are less absurd than they sound. They will certainly explain the most baffling features of the footprint, that they followed one upon another, as if made by one-legged animals. But they still fail to explain why they continued for 40 miles or so. Perhaps the likeliest hypothesis is one put forward by Geoffrey Household, who edited a small book containing all the major correspondence in the matter. He comments as follows: in a letter to the author.
I think that Devonport dockyard released by accident some sort of experimental balloon. It broke free from its moorings and trailed too shackled on the end of ropes. The impression left in the snow by these shackles went up to the sides of houses, over haystacks, etc. A Major Carter, a local man, tells me that his grandfather worked at Devonport at the time, and the whole thing was hushed up because the balloon destroyed a number of conservatories, greenhouses and windows. He says that the balloon finally came down at Hoynton.
This information is fascinating and could well represent the solution to the mystery. But if so, there is still one major anomaly to be explained. A glance at the map of the footprints will show that they meandered in a kind of circle between Topsham and Exmouth. Would an escape balloon drift so erratically? Surely its route would lend to a more straight line, in the direction of the prevailing wind, which, moreover, was blowing from the east. The fact that this took a week for the first report for the mystery to appear in print means that certain vital clues have been lost forever. It would be interesting to know, for example, whether that snow that fell on the night of the February 1855 would have been the first snow. There was a particularly hard winter, and many animals, including rats, rabbits and badgers, would have been half-starved by February and had been looking for food. The letter to the Plymouth Gazette begins.
Thursday night, the 8th of February, was marked by a heavy fall of snow, followed by rain and boisterous wind from the east, and in the morning frost. Small animals had probably been out every night, but it was not until Friday morning, when there was a fresh carpet of snow, that the tracks were noticed for the first time. Such tracks would have sunk deep into the soft snow, and would have been further deepened by the rain before they had frozen solid. This would explain why they seemed to be branded into the snow.
What if the ground was already covered with snow before the night of the 8th of February? Then one more plausible theory would have to be abandoned. And in any case, it fails to explain how the tracks managed to wander over rooftops and haystacks. At this distance in time, the only one certainty seems to be that this mystery has now been lost to the winds of time and is indeed insoluble.